How far would you go to please your significant other? Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 most evil couples in history.
The summer of 1984, federal and local law enforcement are on the hunt for 28-year-old Alton Coleman and his girlfriend, 21-year-old Deborah Brown.
For this list, we're taking a look at romantic duos who had very evil interests in common. These pairings have gone down in history for committing some heinous, usually murderous crimes together. Because of that, we're excluding a couple like Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, because, as evil as Hitler was, his longtime mistress had very little to do with his crimes against humanity.
We have no comment from Hitler about his sweetheart. From others come varying opinions.
Number 10. Fred and Rosemary West.
Mum always disciplined us. She could never just hit us once and forget it.
Even before he became one of England's most reviled serial killers, Fred West had trouble with the law. At 19, he was arrested for fondling a 13-year-old. At 24, he killed a boy with his ice cream truck. And at 27, a woman pregnant with his child disappeared, only to be found dead decades later.
I always get to give myself up. I've got to tell Rose so she can get somebody to help him.
West's sadistic tendencies intensified when he met 15-year-old Rose Letts in 1968. Together, the pair killed at least 12 people, including some of their own children. In fact, to ensure their remaining kids behaved, the couple threatened that they might, quote, end up under the patio like Heather.
The description that Fred gave as to Heather's death was horrendous.
After being charged with murder in 1994, Fred killed himself, while Rosemary remains in jail today.
He was saying that there was no truth in this and that he was going to sue the police.
Number 9. Philip and Nancy Garrido.
Nancy starts bringing me meals. There's a TV over there, so I could watch TV as long as it was low.
While walking to the school bus, 11-year-old JC Dugard was approached by a car and snatched. Despite many witnesses and a huge community effort to locate her, JC remained missing from 1991 to 2009.
Kidnapping 11-year-old JC Dugard in 1991 and keeping her in captivity in her Antioch home for nearly 2 decades.
During that time, Philip and Nancy Garrido kept her in their backyard, with Garrido using her to satisfy his sexual addiction.
Essentially, what we're seeing is a Nancy bringing in and cajoling a young girl to perform on video with a hidden camera for Philip Garrido's sexual perverted satisfaction.
Philip had been arrested for kidnap and rape in 1976, and it was while he was in jail for that crime that he met Nancy. Inevitably, during her 18 years in captivity, Dugard gave birth to 2 of Garrido's children. But finally in 2009, Garrido brought Dugard and her 2 girls with him to the parole office, where JC was identified and her nightmare ended.
I was kidnapped by a stranger at age 11, and I want Philip Garrido to know that I no longer have to keep his secret.
Number 8. Roman Podkopayev and Inessa Tarverdieva. This entry not only encompasses a couple, but their family as well. And, on paper at least, they seemed like a normal middle-class group. He's a dentist and she's a former teacher. But together with 2 of Tarverdieva's daughters, they terrorized Russia for 6 years until 2013, committing numerous robberies and over 30 murders, including many cops.
No more dead cops! Yeah!
Reports vary on whether he or she was the mastermind of the crimes, but what's clear is that they viewed this spree as, quote, going to the office for a day's work. At last, their reign of terror ended in a violent shootout where Podkopayev was killed. What do you suppose was the goal of these crimes? Cold, hard cash. Number 7. Syed Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik.
We are in pursuit of the suspect vehicle. We've got shots fired out the back window.
Homegrown terrorism is a growing problem, and this case resulted in one of the deadliest mass shootings in California history. Inspired by foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS, on December 2, 2015, Farouk and Malik opened fire on guests at a holiday party at the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health, where Farouk worked. and had planned to detonate bombs as well.
Both suspects dead. Police finding rifles, pistols, and thousands of rounds of ammo in their car.
By the time it was over, the couple was dead, as were 14 civilians, with 22 others injured. According to the FBI, they'd become radicalized in the years leading to the crime by, quote, consuming poison on the internet.
She's probably the most radicalized of the two of what we've seen so far, and could easily persuade, a spouse.
And in that time, Farouk and Malik planned and carried out the deadliest terrorist attack on the U.S. since 9/11.
So the message not only for the city but for this entire region is we understand people are scared and we understand that there's concern that there may be more folks out there.
Number 6. Alvin and Judith Neely.
Georgia and Alabama authorities, now joined by federal agents, searched across several states for the Neelys.
Both inclined towards a life of wrongdoing. Alvin and Judith Neely's criminal activities intensified when the husband and wife pair kidnapped 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken from a Georgia mall in September 1982.
They were sadistic sociopaths to the core.
They subsequently took her to an Arizona motel to rape and torture her, with the young girl even being injected with Drano before she was ultimately fatally shot. They similarly targeted a young couple not long after, but John Hancock survived and identified his attackers.
She admitted to walking him out into the woods, shooting him in the back, leaving him for dead.
While Alvin was able to avoid the death penalty, Judith was not so lucky. She became the youngest woman in the United States to be sentenced to death. However, that sentence was commuted to life in 1999.
You don't see those crimes around here. That's something that you always hear about somewhere else, and it was just a tragedy.
Number 5. Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate.
As long as you do as I tell you, it'll be okay.
While most teens were hanging out with friends, 19-year-old Charles Starkweather and 14-year-old Carol Ann Fugate were spree killing their way through Nebraska and Wyoming.
The first killing was a local farmer named Meyer, who had in the past permitted Starkweather to hunt from his property. Starkweather shot him for no reason.
From December 1957 to January 1958, Starkweather murdered 11 people, including Fugate's own family, with Fugate as an accomplice to many of these crimes.
That's why she wouldn't let me in that house, because there was something wrong. And now, like I said, I know why.
The pair was finally caught almost by accident when police happened by their stalled car on the roadside. A high-speed chase later, and both were arrested, with Starkweather receiving the death penalty and Fugate becoming the youngest female ever tried for first-degree murder in the U.S., earning herself 17.5 years in the slammer.
Please, God, don't let me lose my mind. That was my prayer. Don't let me lose my mind after what I'd been through.
Their story was so riveting, it inspired various on-screen adaptations, including Badlands, California, and Natural Born Killers. Number 4. Gerald and Charlene Gallego.
32-year-old Gerald Gallego wakes up his 21-year-old girlfriend, Charlene Williams, and tells her that today is the day to make his fantasies a reality.
Whether you grew up wealthy or were beaten by your mother's various boyfriends, you could still grow up to be a killer.
Gerald's mother was a prostitute, and she was neglectful, cold, domineering.
A good student with loving parents, Charlene went off the rails in her teens, eventually finding the troubled Gerald.
He has already been arrested 23 times for crimes ranging from robbery and sexual assault to escaping from prison.
When the couple lost the spark in their relationship, they decided the cure was sex slaves. So they kidnapped, raped, and murdered a total of 10 people, mostly teenaged girls, in California, Nevada, and Oregon between 1978 and 1980.
The couple would hunt for many of their victims at Sacramento area malls. Charlene testified in court she was the one who lured girls into their van, where Gerald waited with a gun.
Gerald did most of the dirty work, but Charlene was a more than willing participant. However, she testified against her husband in exchange for a reduced sentence.
This was a means for Charlene to break free of Gerald and his control over her.
She was released in 1997. Gerald died of rectal cancer in 2002 while on death row. Number 3. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley.
My version of events is exactly the same as Ian's.
These two were made for each other. Described as remorseless and sadistic, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were responsible for some of Britain's most notorious homicides.
She tricked her into going to Saddleworth Moor to look for a lost glove. Ian Brady followed on his motorbike.
In 1963, after becoming obsessed with the idea of a so-called perfect murder, Brady and Hindley committed the first of their 5 confirmed killings, the victims of which were all between the ages of 10 and 17, and most of whom were sexually abused before their deaths.
In an extraordinary court exchange, he claimed his killings were recreational compared to the deaths caused by what he called Tony Blair's war crimes.
Many of their victims' bodies were later unearthed in Saddleworth Moor, hence the nickname the Moors Murders. After being turned into police by Hindley's brother-in-law in October 1965, both were ultimately found guilty and sentenced to life. But it wasn't until 1987 that they formally confessed to the crimes.
The death of Myra Hindley was celebrated in the national press. But Keith Bennett's family worried that the chance of finding his body may have died with her.
Number 2. Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck.
You got such a fire, baby. I'm putting up with this. But I'm not leaving without my money. Got it?
The things you do for love. He was the victim of a head injury that might have impaired his behavior. She was the overweight single mother living in a dream world. Together, they were the Lonely Hearts Killers, using newspaper personal ads to find, rob, and kill lonely women. Before he met Martha Beck in 1947, Raymond Fernandez had already seduced and stolen from several women, with one dying mysteriously.
It's a special day.
Sometimes posing as his sister, Beck joined him in his life of crime, and by 1949, they had killed at least 3 people, including a 2-year-old.
I like it when you watch me work.
After their arrest, they were executed by electric chair on March 8, 1951, and they proclaimed their love for each other until the very end.
He kills for me. That's how much he loves me.
Before we reveal our top pick, here are some honorable, or in this case, dishonorable mentions.
Is it a stick up? Yes, there's a stick up! All right.
In Carol, he found someone who was receptive, and because he combined his fantasies of violence with lovemaking, it began to sort of desensitize Carol to the idea of this extreme violence.
Stephen put up a fight.
Johnny, help!
But his hope of help faded when his daughter joined in the killing.
She would stimulate parts of David Burney's anatomy while he was raping the young lady and turning on more.
Number 1. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka.
It wasn't long before she also fell under his spell.
Murder is inherently evil, but killing your own sister is on a whole other level. Alongside her husband-to-be Paul Bernardo, also known as the Scarborough Rapist, Karla Homolka was involved in her sister's death in 1990.
Karla and her family never suspected Paul. They adored him, especially Karla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy, who looked up to him like a big brother.
The sadistic Canadian couple was eventually convicted of raping and murdering 3 teenage girls in the early 90s.
With Karla's knowledge, Paul continued to stalk women throughout the Niagara region.
However, in exchange for her damning testimony, Homolka's sentence was reduced to 12 years for manslaughter thanks to a plea deal, since Bernardo was the supposed mastermind and she was merely his accomplice.
She describes her role as both victimizer and victim.
Of course, video evidence of their crimes later surfaced, proving that Homolka was much more involved than she let on.
Amazing things happen on those tapes. She is dressed like a schoolgirl. At this time, she's a grown woman, right? She's dressed like a schoolgirl. She's speaking in this little schoolgirl voice.
Homolka was released from prison in 2005, but Bernardo remains behind bars to this day.
Karla told police that Paul had murdered Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French after raping them for several days. She said there were videotapes to prove it.
Do you agree with our list? Which couple do you think is the most evil?
This afternoon, Brady justified all 5 murders as an existential experience.
For more informative top 10s published every day, be sure to subscribe to WatchMojo.com.
Judith was released in November 1981. Alvin followed in April 1982, and the two resumed their life together.